I am under this amount of stress for this amount of time. I'll admit to that much. Why he isn't? And I don't walk around saying I love having responsibility. I didn't walk around both thumping my chest and saying shit like that back when I was working for Capital. DJing was possibly a more sincere way to enjoy responsibility, because I wasn't constantly getting, you played a Marilyn Manson video clip in your room and it's got us all, we think you might need medication. Oh, really? The one that's like in the high rebate category that your pharmacist was saying the other day is good for gross net profit? Yeah, that's the kind. Oh, okay. Well, how do you construe that this piece of art is the cause of dangerous thinking? By religiously misinterpreting it on your behalf. Okay. What's the Religious Discrimination Act? Okay. Yeah, so he kind of works backwards to, he used to say if you're gay, it means that your responsibility comes from the rebellion against your own sexuality. And I could never make sense of that term or that definition. But now I can picture him going, I have a very precise research methodology. What is it? I rebel against the basic principles of Sherlock Holmes. Like he imagines himself doing that tease. Like he just fucks up Sherlock Holmes' day. Doing some stupid dance. I'm a real clever researcher. I mean, my experience and observations aren't a prejudice. They more or less are admitted to in many respects, by the people I've had to work for. Then they're on the radio all the time. Canberra having a mental health act that's like 10 times more pages than any other state or territory in Australia. Yeah, well, you know. And then whole rights movements that are taking hits because they're too inclined to give too many idiots the benefit of the doubt. You end up realizing that in no way were the brilliant minds of the artists that you grew up listening to and thinking about in school, they almost prepared you for kinds of attrition you'd encounter in the workforce years before you could even comprehend what it would be like. But yeah, he got the idea of video psychosis because he doesn't like the change in his wife's tone of voice when she sees men with more distinguished faces than his. So that was the psychosis part. The video part is that he doesn't like the look of his own reflection. I mean, facial profiling isn't an exact science, just as what he does isn't an exact science. But he's a nauseating person to deal with when you realize he's too docile or too idiotic to detect basic, like, that was a person under your employ politely noting you'd violated the Religious Discrimination Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, and you did it all in the form of a verbal workplace order or instruction. That was them noticing that you infringed against the Human Rights Act and seemed to be conflating it with their best understanding of whatever you mean by company professional privilege information. So I think overall what happens is, if he even once, if in one case he ask him how often, well, he'll say himself he'd never makes mistakes. So that means every profile about every person he's ever researched at any point and ever studied and ever written down isn't a mistake, according to Roger. Now, there's really only one type of activist group that insists they have a perfect understanding of the nature of things existentially, and they tend to be the religious right. We don't make mistakes as fascist, and then in conjunction with everybody needs us. We know what matters. As fascist as, drink the blood of Christ and eat the body of Christ and believe you belong to a 6,000-year-old species created from inbreeding in a garden, or be tortured forever. Because this church and that church there all have the truth and the meaning of life. They know what matters. Yeah. I would agree with the common eye of the average citizen. It's perhaps not enough to reach the conclusion company founded by religious lunatics, just from looking at the slogans alone. You have to experience it firsthand, what they're capable of. So that's me exploring all sorts of interesting puzzles throughout history. Like I recently got some criminology books that I want to read because I'm very interested in. I'm trying to find one on the pathology and typology of religious criminal intellects. Because I'm convinced they absolutely have to be called out and confronted with their own words. The sorts of things that they'll keep to themselves and harass you when they know no one else is particularly watching, but they think, they have the perfect chance for me to get away with this. The mentality you go through when you're like egging houses before you grow pubes. And except that's Roger as a full-grown man of achievements that command all our respect. And I think so. For every time he stated he was a person of responsibility who makes no mistakes, but then imposed corrections on someone against their consent, and then was even potentially wrong and not prepared to turn up for court appearances and disputes. And he gathered his so-called intel through misinterpretation and after Privacy Act violation, and he doesn't step forward to acknowledge his error. This is where you learn you don't want to become anything like him, and he becomes the single strongest deterrent from the entire profession of pharmacy. I don't like prejudice at all myself, so, I watch how I actually do enjoy the atmosphere at the Northbourne chemist and the discount chemist. They have a less, you don't have feelings of just weird, nonsensical, you're a person of suspicion just because you're sick of getting a script when you enter those sorts of chemists. But if you ask yourself, well, what's the price that a mind or a conscience pays when they keep waxing these absolute statements, like a car salesman who can tell you why, like, the shittest automatic $200 car is the best way to, gear you up to sort of a future on the roads. And that car salesman can always tell you why the $200 car is, just perfect for you. He starts going that way, and then as far as what has he achieved in this research line of violating Australia's constitution, and he'll always want to justify it, but the justifications aren't there unless consequentialism applies to him when in error. But he's insisting he can never be in error. So the result is, the byproduct is that a bunch of really poorly formed analytical skills start to just fester, and he becomes that little bit more stupider when attempting to analyze or size up the next person he tries to study. And then it progresses. I'm truly doing my best not to be a bigot in any sense where it's like, well, why would you discriminate on someone? Like, people like Bertrand Russell has remained distinguished well into old age. So did Bowie. Bertrand Russell would protest nuclear weaponry, and I think was at one point arrested for it. But yeah, it certainly does explain his prejudice against his abject. Well, I worked out the pattern to his prejudice against drugs quite. It didn't take a great amount of time. The things he was saying about recreational or street drugs were way exaggerated. And all of it, what he would say was essentially like, name one moment that he would actually say some known truth about the potential side effects or adverse reactions to antipsychotics, even though they're well documented. He would be more inclined to say he was concerned about more than a gram of paracetamol overpowering lactic acid production in the liver, and that being a danger, than antipsychotics that can harm the cardiovascular system. Watch him talk about how amazing they are, not because the Health Insurance Commission rebate is $1,000 thereabouts every month, but because he truly cares for your health and knows what matters. Well, what an interesting coincidence. And then he'll actually say things that demonstrate you're either not allowed to get sick or not thought of in the same sense of human as humans under the Rights Act. If you do work for him, because he'll say things like, well, don't be a patient, or think that a temporary been under too much stress is, an invite for a lifetime enslavement under the Mental Health Act, essentially. So I think, the religious person that's a criminal offender. I'm starting to think, what if you lined up because if you talk to jailed pedophiles, a friend of mine has shared her stories of speaking to jailed pedophiles in jail, and they're saying, oh, these kids, we honestly love them, right? We really, really love them. And it's like, well, if you were to give that testimony the benefit of the doubt, I mean, is it possible there's some trait in a religious criminal offender's mind that they genuinely don't know how to stop? And despite they don't know how to stop thinking that they're on a higher or more ennobled path. Like, you know, to question them would just be a sign of your plebness, and that you're a commoner with delusions of grandeur, and you can never know what sort of, you're incapable of knowing about the hard work and dedication. Because that's the strange thing when you read books by like Mein Kampf and things Hitler wrote and Napoleon Bonaparte and even George Bush. God told me to strike at Al-Qaeda. And then that woman in the courtroom, God told me to drown the kids in the bathtub. Where do you draw the line, and do they actually have to have... Does there have to be a massive intervention and confrontation, or else, even if they were like politely warned, they would, you know, kiss ass, go off and elsewhere, and then calculate other ways to reoffend? Like, what does it actually take until they learn, until a man like Roger learns his fucking lesson? And the answer is that can't be calculated because it's lessons, plural, not lessons, singular. So, yeah, I do think of Gary and Roger. I'm not going to name people who I know didn't really like or trust any one of them in particular within the company, because then they would call me a gossip. But I'm thankful to them, and I'm thankful to the locums I saw stand up to them directly, because you've seen Gary like yell when it's the I can speak with it. I can speak real deep. How, you know, instead of let's cogently engage point to point, and then Gary convinces you he at least heard of the scientific method. So, yeah, obviously, if you take that element where, you know, they're saying that there's people with weak genes, they'll perish. You just got to love them in good faith. We're here to help always. Even if we violate the Constitution, we're here to help. It's all in good faith. Call them love when you sell them meds. And don't be a patient if you're a member of staff. And you know, what is it hard? Is it really that hard to think along what lines do their teachings? You're saying it's not like a homo boys club where they talk about who's the mightiest, like how they're the mightiest, of course. Because yeah, I think you know, everything from poor them with weak genes to, you know, genes cause 9/11 to genes cause violence. It's the genes' fault. Yeah, don't get me wrong. What I like about the story, as in the Jungian archetypal sense, is that Lucifer, all in all, Lucifer doesn't have omnipotence, omnibenevolence, or omniscience, which are the three traits attributed to the biblical God of the Abrahamic faith traditions, who my friends in America and I call omnimax, like omni traits to the max degree. So people who people who are real and genuine and are almost the opposite of what they say they are and are about, hypocrisy, the hypocritic oath. that, who knows, maybe they're taking those in Masonic church services, is one thing I detest. And that element in those two, and I can only imagine the sorts of you don't have the level of awareness to comprehend what starting a business has taken, and you don't know the element of the gambler in their conscience. The whole population culling, like let the weak perish, at least they can be medicated on their way down. Idealism subverting free thinking to bolster medication sales, to the point that they get so stupid at trying to size up what matters to you, or because you found an art piece compelling and thought provocative, and like you even anticipated that they would inquire into your life without telling you, and that there was possibly nothing you could do about that so long as you were in their employ. So let them see what you're more or less about if they're going through your computer. So you do all that, and even then, still, like, they still have not made that inner confrontation. I get it, it's that have a go. You got to have a go because life's a competition, and the big fish eat the little one. And if that drive and impulse is so intense as to such a force multiplier that the pharmacist's code of ethics don't matter, the subordination of the pharmacist to a prescriber and a clinical consultant doesn't matter. And just the rudeness in principle to go, well, if you think about it, Freemason is a form of faith-based theology. So just in thinking that they can say what a piece of art means to the person experiencing it, and whose thoughts are provoked by this or that piece of art, the art appreciator is some sort of like a floppy disk receiving binary code programming from the art piece, and it's always, all the words are it's like I used to like the analogy of that 80s song of shoot that poison arrow through my heart, and the Freemasons not getting that that's a metaphor. And they're like, well, shit, like, search his house. Does he have any arrow tips? Has he dipped them in any arsenic? Whose heart would he go for with the poison arrow? Does he have a bow for the arrow? Oh, shit. And they think that they're coming up with all these secrecy originating questions that you start to see are just have this almost geometric proportionate to like they wind up becoming like they've imposed little peepholes into your life, back into the stupidity of this church of theirs, that I think should just step up. And if they want to say that they're not as twisted and fucked in the head as men like Rolf Harris and Cardinal George Pell, then, you know, I'm still a person that wished I didn't hear the sorts of words come out of both their mouths that I have. But, you know, Manson's Doppelhers, they couldn't even, it didn't occur to any of them. So you take that Holmesian investigation principle, once the impossible is eliminated, then whatever explanation, no matter how improbable, is the truth or close to the truth. And this line about the rejection of the crucifixion, and like, it probably wouldn't take 10 minutes of Googling Marilyn Manson quotes. Or if you were just to observe Manson's body language gestures at the time of that part of the voiceover. And they think that it's the film's about a plan to conceal a kidnap beating and then lie about what they believe in. All that line about the belief It's because Manson doesn't merely want to be believed in. We'd rather have you question what his sings about, says in interviews. So it feels ingenuine to him to just have people around him going, "I believe in you, Manson. I believe in you." And they think it's about lying. You're declaring that you will lie about what you believe in. Well, no, you're in a Freemason church. You're in a secretive Freemason church, and you're lying about what you believe in. And your own words have indicated that time and time again. Oh, you just got to have a go, love. Have a bluff. Have a fucking... You almost think you're at Casino Canberra. Oh, they both start with CC, Capital Chemist, Casino Canberra. It's infuriating. And what would they have found if they went through my computer? Forum dialogue after forum dialogue, with me addressing how the atheist position can be misrepresented easily by Christians, them telling me at work how they think Christians are pretty much paranoid, and then these two Freemason idiots, almost given the resources that they have, make bigger fools of themselves than the Christians, pretty much. Just from a different angle. I can't understand it. Where is their self-respect? So they could not eliminate. Like, you got album covers where crosses that don't feature Jesus on them are being lit on fire. You've got interviews where Manson's been interviewed by the Fox News guy, Bill O'Reilly, and he's pointing out, people are hanging it on their walls in all their homes. It's an image they've grown up worshipping. It's violent. It's an image of murder. It has sexual imagery. So you really think that a rock star as big as him would make a respect-based agreement to appear on a Bill O'Reilly interview to promote and draw attention to the fact that the crucifixion was like sexually sick, a murder, and violent? That's the beauty of Capital Chemists and the Health Insurance Commission. Why make sense if you can make dollars? The capitalist ideal is defended in principle to some extent by female author Ayn Rand, and certain atheists see her as having contributed on the topic of liberalism in some admirable ways to the atheist sort of the new atheism isn't really a new thing. It's just that it's recent. It's recent, and it's a deviation from the equivocation of godless with an immoral man or an immoral woman, because that was obviously from a religious dictionary. If godless meant the same thing as immoral. But I've always liked statements like there are good works to be done everywhere, and what I think, you have someone like Roger go, well, we're capitalists. What I genuinely think is true about his character is it left me with this impression of, going beyond the aesthetic of the stereotypical aesthetic of the Masonic Church, as known for its secrecy, and starting to ask questions about why does it have this secret. I mean, we live today in a society where, YouTube, essentially there are open invitations to Masonic thinkers to take to a podium and debate their view. So, do they amongst themselves think, I understand what secrecy can do. There was, I read and studied in psychology, a man had kidnapped a woman, locked her in a cupboard, and raped her repeatedly over a number of months. He was eventually discovered by police authorities, and what astonished them on having arrested him was that the woman was saying, like, apparently, complaining, "No, don't take him away, don't take him away," and he would essentially leave her locked in the cabinet, rape her and feed her, and then she'd shit. But it talked about a phenomenon where, maybe is it called Stockholm Syndrome? I'm kind of off the top of my head recall, but it's one where a person gets so mistreated over such an amount of time that too much of it becomes second nature, and they wind up pitying and empathizing and even feeling affection. Affection towards the perpetrator. But like, or what is a Freemason capitalist do exactly? Like, for what I was taught Roger's involved in, why wouldn't he have wanted to say, "Hey, Luke, check out my master's in psychology, and tell me about his great credentials," and inspired me to want to to consider investing my life's work in pharmacy and his franchise in particular. Why would he rather say, "Be a good poofter"? Why would he say, "Be a good poofter" instead of, "Are you happy to disclose your sexual orientation in a workplace conversation? I'm co-owner of the company"? And why, if he wasn't prepared to do that, would he then not say, "Oh, here's my credentials as a researcher and my qualifications in psychology, psychiatry, etc." And so I'll admit it's not the typical we'll lead the way, though there are elements of that in it that you've seen in daffy evangelical evangelical idiot movements, where Ted Haggard is married with children and then having gay sex in hotels with gay prostitutes on speed, and then he comes forward and apologizes to the family, and then there's a speech where he says evangelicals have the best sex lives. Where you begin to wonder if the campaign to change the world is the corrupting principle. Nietzsche touched on that in criticizing the concept of the teachers of the purpose of existence in general. Do we need them? And if purposefulness is a subjective thing, should it be approached and queried on an individualistic level instead of being pigeonholed by Christian outreach churchies saying, "Oh, we know the meaning of your life"? Is that rude? Is it rude if they're only bluffing by even to their own best awareness? But then how much better are these Freemasons? I would dare say that they've taken this element of them being secretive too far. I mean, if they want to say that the artists that I like, the rock bands that I like, are singing devil's music, and what next? Like Eminem, because he made the D12 album in 2001, Devil's Night, his meeting in Masonic temples, chanting in Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, and there's naked women that are blindfolded, and I mean, just to relate these genres of music that's conceptually so much more diversified than a simple, it's cheesy as. It's like saying that because Depeche Mode sang Personal Jesus and because Marilyn Manson covered Personal Jesus, that Marilyn Manson stopped being the Antichrist in 2004 and became a Christian in 2004 and did a complete turnaround and not taking even a cursory inquiry into his interviews or anything, where he said from the outset that God, like the devil, doesn't exist either. So the one irony for them is that it's the Church of Satan that actually show up the Masonic Church in principle, because if you get to the higher echelons of the Satanic Church, the Church of Satan, there's quibs, jeers and quibs that Anton LaVey writes about in the Satanic Bible, where it says, like, well, the devil's been the church's best friend, he's kept them in business for years. But that's more of a, like, you can just hear LaVey almost laughing at the Christian church as he, wrote down those words, because just the archetypal meaning of opponent or adversary or outcast. But then that doesn't quite sum up the Freemasons either, because, if they're this opportunistic and their secrecy is because they're concealing, like they've got some concealed source of value, like what are they about that their secrecy is so justified? It must be a sort of secrecy that they themselves consider necessary on certain fronts. But it can't be a sort of secrecy that they think is because their ideas are too in advance of where mankind is at now. It can't be because, like, they would have to be up themselves to think the rest of us aren't ready for what they have to say. They could have representatives debate any one of a number of free thinkers, skeptics, and even theologians would want to meet and debate them, but they obviously choose not to. So, but then they obviously, it's not like, I couldn't imagine them never taking any sort of inquiry into what philosophy at large has to say about the sorts of ideas on which they topically weigh in on. So, if they're not compelled to have a single representative really come out and say, well, us Masons have thought this, to me it seems more likely that they see themselves running into argumentative dead ends. If they appointed it seems more valuable to them that they're thought of in this spooky Fox Mulder, truth is out there, secretive, kind of like the stonecutters on The Simpsons. Then is it likely that they have an ace in the hole? So it's probably the case that if they were in debates, they would look really stupid, because then we would all see that, their ideas are actually, Homer Simpson having a stone-cutter tattoo on his fat and having to drag the stone of shame on an ankle chain is more dignified, essentially, than what the church will actually, the Masonic Church would actually, front up and talk about if they're asked. So then if you have a Mason cross capitalist, then what's he trying to do? I genuinely have this sense that they think they haven't been shown the respect that they are due, not that, and so thus they retreat on those grounds. I don't think there are these correlations, suggestions that they're into, like population culling, and I've heard talk about, certain families just have weak genes, and it sounds very similar to biblical concordum narratives. Obliviousness to what their so-called research interests can do with, it's convenient. They can abscond, do damage, turn up no truths that were of any interest to any sort of case profiling initiative, and then fuck off back to secrecy land and go, well, in which case they should, on that ground alone, be perhaps brought out into the limelight and made more accountable. Because it's more cunty than what I've seen in Christian youth pastors, where they give the sermon, they assert the meaningfulness of what they're about, and then then they at least, and this is not a pander to the Christian right, though I know they'll want to take it as one. At least the dumb fat youth pastor got copped criticisms and thought accountability meant something. Now, whatever it is he thinks or thought it meant, the one I knew is now a Muslim. Is that what the Freemasons are worried about now? Their best theologies wouldn't hold water in the preliminary rounds of a dichotomous character position debate. I've heard them at work throw around terms like repressed, suggesting ideas like repressed things mean anything. I think they're sort of bind words, because it's like saying you can't be a former something. Like if you leave the church and you've studied its key principles, the arguments against them made more sense, so you rejected those teachings. Then you can therefore, you're an X something. The prospect of a repressed something, that's something. It's sort of like what the Christians try to do and say, well, we want you to stay in church forever, because if you leave, you never were a Christian probably to begin with. It's that same sort of bigotedness from a different angle. So they go into capitalism, and it's what get your hand in every sort of pocket you can. Diversify your portfolio, which is your faith-based. Oh, let's do all these things in good faith. So back to that woman drowned her kids in the bathtub in good faith. She had the same sort of faith. And that's what you have to be wary of with faith-based belief systems, is that anything can essentially be justified in principle. Whether you're saying God just decided it was that person's time to die, or Lucifer was just creating some chaos so that the strong would rise in glory, and the weak would perish. It's the same sort of stupidity. If someone you ever intended charge accosted you claiming, "Oh, we were jealous," it really is very sad on their behalf. I think that they would have to feel that on a personal level they were pathetic as people. That's the element of fussing out Gary Cairns and Roger Toll, is that you wonder if, how they talk about a distinguished elderly man is in the later years of his life, Bertrand Russell, that he made it to being a very distinguished elderly man. Roger Toll and Gary made it to being as not as well as an exposed couple of fag-ped preds as they're going to be by the time that I am finished dealing with them. And that's not distinguished. That's not even close to notable Australians distinguished. It's not even distinguished at all. It's if they had a opposite book like Notable Australians, and then they had Anthony Lamb from the Hughes Pharmacy featuring in that book as a notable Australian, and then they had an opposite book called for the peds, fuckwits and fucked in the head. like Australia's Most Fucked in the Head, a book like that. And Gary Cans and Roger Tor would be in that, and that'd be the two going. Are we the two that got the Freemason Church inquired into? Oh, fuck. Inquired into as fostering even more fucked up pedophilic heads than Cardinal Pell if he could hide behind a medical license of some kind. Oh, fuck. The sources I have considered, and they do not include any testimony from the Church of Satan, and they include one direct news source that's I think a bit more dignified than others. But I've never had a sense of opposition to the incarceration of Charles Manson, which the Church of Satan actually and people like Nicholas Schreck and Zena LeVay, they've both spoken in debates representing the Church of Satan in debates through what seems to be a transition. They must have gone through some sort of philosophical transition where they shifted from what is distinguished as theistic to non-theistic Satanism. So, in the older interview that you see them prepared to talk about spells to an extent, and then in the following interview, which is the Bob Larson interview, they are Satan is an archetypal idea for the opponent or the one to question. The adversary, the one who opposes status quo views. So yeah, I don't. Now since then, two more modern leaders and members, high echelons of the Church of Satan seem to be strictly defining it as a non-theistic. I wondered if it was something like with pantheism, how Richard Dawkins refers to it as being like sexed up atheism. But it would be the same to like Bishop Spong saying, he's a non-theist Christian, and so he doesn't believe in the existence of a God, but he believes in heaven. Would be like a non-theistic Satanist saying that the devil doesn't exist, but then still casting spells. Like, there are things like there's ritual. Ritual is tricky to define. Can you have ritual without having? And what is a ritual? And would a ritual be independent of any theistic connotations? And could they extend the definition of ritual to a dance festival, or me and Rocker Stedford, or what? Like I'd have to check the dictionary on that one. But I think Manson was careful to avoid. He was offered a minister in the Church of Satan position or title by Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, who is a man who had an affair actually with Marilyn Monroe prior to both of their careers getting big. She had an appreciation for the darker side of man, she would say, and that's what Anton LaVey would remember about her. But so obviously from Anton LaVey's standpoint, he heard of an up-and-coming rock band. The lead singer had named himself after Marilyn Monroe and Charles Manson, so there was a meeting there. And Manson describes in his biography the experience of visiting the Church of Satan, and he's watching them like almost dogmatically kind of say, "Hail Satan," and like he did see it as being, it wasn't his thing, like, and they gave him funny looks when he didn't join them in saying "Hail Satan." Um, so, his nonconformist attitude isn't really one that's limited to, postmodern, philosophical and existential inspired indictment and vitriol toward the supernatural, if not and the hypocritical, hypocritical, claims of the Christian right. But it's these two, well, in particular, Nicholas Schreck seems to be the biggest advocate for claiming that Charles Manson's incarceration is an error. But then you watch the it's just an interesting, it's interesting to know what principles, in effect, that they considered philosophically, because, you could say, well, you're so big on this archetype of opposition and being the one to question, so what did you two question at the point where you stopped comprehending Set and these satanic entities, which, it's just the other side of the coin to theism with gods and angels. You got Lucifer, and Satan, and Set, and theistic thought is a type of thought, but it's a whole. There are whole new and I think more dignified language forms in philosophy alone to come across. Then I hate that stupid either or. Either you believe in God or you're with the devil. There'd be an element, I can even remember it in my teens, where some people would want to just walk into a church and say something, loud, referencing the devil. But it was clear that they just had an instinct to rebel against church and didn't like it for one reason or another. And I grew not to like it either. I just didn't. For me, it was more the result of study and debate and asking questions that, brought me to the point where I was more motivated to deconvert than I was to have any sort of genuine sense of religious observance about me. Yeah. Yeah, because I just find that to be an interesting trend. It's like, well, you can tell these interviews are much older because Miss LeVay, sorry, looks quite a bit younger. Nicholas Schreck still has his ear, and they're talking in that interview about, still with the same guy, Bob Larson, but they're talking about they speak about demonic spell casting, like they see it as like a valid craft, not like how you would think about a herbalist guy telling you that there are herbs for everything. For people that don't like, for people who don't want to be taking actual Valium, there's this herb here, or if you've had a skull fracture and you have persistent physically disabling pain with little to no response from medication, and you don't like to use opioid-based medications, drugs for that pain, then there's herbs where the leaves are soaked in blood from a goat's testicles or something. But or it could be how some people have genuinely reported feeling about the difference between proper brand Valium diazepam and non-cross licensed generics, which is where they don't come from the same factory, but they don't come from the same factory, but they've met independent TGA bioequivalence trials criteria, so that a pharmacist can substitute the one for another, unless the doctor's prescription specifies otherwise. You know. But then you can ask other interesting questions like, well, what is the difference between what's the moral difference between, you know, a church praying for, you know, God to have His will in the lives of His just will in the lives of a family in the next suburb, and then, you know, that family's roof cave in and one or two family members die, and on the same day members of the Church of Satan cast a curse on them as well. And, you know, anyway, it's all pretty interesting. Charles Manson's charge, I think, formally was conspiracy, which I think meant he was some sort of religious leader who, in his mind, a religiously based war was approaching, and so he was like preparing his following for that, but I don't know how he understood ethics and strategy as far as his role in this war was concerned, or what the war would entail, but I understand that to have been the basic backdrop upon which this